My name is Alara Vance. I'm 34, and for most of my adult life, the rhythm of my days was dictated by the quiet hum of a centrifuge and the intricate dance of genes under a microscope. I am a geneticist, a path I chose not out of ambition, but out of a deep and abiding love for the elegant logic of life's code, a love instilled in me by my grandfather. When he passed away 2 years ago, he left me his seaside home and the entirety of his estate. It was a final, breathtaking gesture of his belief in me. It was also the catalyst that fractured my family, exposing the brittle fault lines of love and obligation that had been hidden for decades beneath a carefully polished surface. My mother, in a desperate attempt to seize the inheritance for my brother, did something unimaginable. She walked into my laboratory and systematically destroyed a decade of my life's work. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come, delivered not in a moment of rage, but in the quiet, sterile report of a DNA analysis. If you're wondering what could drive a mother to such an act of destruction, I invite you to sit with me for a while. This story isn't about vengeance or blame. It's about the slow, painful, and ultimately liberating process of rebuilding a life from its foundations and learning that the families we choose can be stronger than the ones we are born into. It's a story about learning to see the truth, not as a weapon, but as the first difficult step toward healing. My grandfather, Arthur Sterling, was a man who saw the universe in a grain of sand and eternity in the swirling tides of the Atlantic. He was a retired marine biologist, and our home in Port Blossom, Maine, was his living laboratory. While other children were learning their ABCs, I was learning the Latin names of mollusks and the intricate life cycle of the sea star. He never spoke down to me. At 8 years old, I sat beside him on the damp, salt-sprayed rocks of Sterling Cove, a place named for our family generations ago, and listened as he explained genetic drift using the different colored periwinkle shells we'd collected. "Look here, Ellie," he'd say, his voice a low, gentle rumble like the distant surf. "Each shell is a tiny bit different. Over time, the ones that are better suited to this rock, this current, this world, they thrive. It's not a competition. It's a conversation between life and its environment." His home, a weathered cedar-shingled house perched on a cliff overlooking the bay, was my sanctuary. Its rooms were filled with the scent of old paper, briny air, and the lemon polish he used on his antique wooden desks. His library was my cathedral, shelves stretching to the ceiling, filled not just with scientific tomes, but with poetry, philosophy, and history. He taught me that science was not a cold collection of facts, but a deeply human quest for understanding, a form of poetry in its own right. This passion for inquiry was a language my own parents never quite learned to speak. My mother, Eleanor, was a woman for whom life was a series of appearances to be maintained. Her world was the garden club, the charity board, the perfectly curated dinner party. She loved me, I believe, in the best way she knew how, but my quiet intensity and my preference for tide pools over tea parties were a constant source of bewilderment for her. My father, Richard, was a professor of English literature at North Haven University, a kind, gentle man who had long ago learned that domestic peace was best achieved by deferring to my mother's formidable will. Then there was my brother, Leo. For years my junior, Leo was the sun around which my mother's world revolved. He was charming, handsome, and effortlessly popular, but he moved through life with a restless energy, never quite settling. While I was in the university library mapping out my doctoral thesis, Leo was launching a series of ill-fated business ventures, a gourmet food truck that failed its health inspection, a line of artisanal surf wax that never hardened properly, and finally, a foray into real estate development that seemed to consist mostly of taking potential investors out for expensive lunches. Each of Leo's failures was cushioned by our mother's unwavering support. "He just needs to find his niche," she'd say, her voice laced with a defensive pride. "Not everyone is as focused as you, Alara. Leo has a different kind of brilliance." I never begrudged Leo the attention. We were different planets orbiting different suns. With my grandfather's encouragement and a small research grant he provided when others wouldn't, I established my own lab at North Haven. I specialized in a rare, inherited neurodegenerative disorder, Sterling-Vance neuropathy, a condition first documented by my grandfather in local fishing families in the 1960s. It was a cruel disease, stealing motor function from children and young adults, and for 10 years, I dedicated myself to untangling its genetic roots. My lab was my haven, a place of order and purpose. The meticulous work of pipetting, sequencing, and data analysis was a calming counterpoint to the unpredictable currents of family life. Everything changed on a crisp autumn morning 2 years ago. The call came from my father. My grandfather had passed away in his sleep, his heart finally giving out at the age of 91. He had been reading a book of poetry by the sea. A profound, hollow silence opened up inside me. My North Star, the man who had taught me to read the world, was gone. I didn't know then that his death was not an end, but the beginning of a storm that would tear through our lives, leaving nothing untouched. The funeral was held in the small, white-steepled church that looked out over the cove he had loved so dearly. The air was thick with the scent of salt and lilies. I spoke of his legacy, not of property or wealth, but of curiosity, kindness, and his unwavering belief in the power of a single, dedicated mind to make a difference. My voice, usually so steady when presenting research, faltered as I recalled the periwinkle shells on the rocks. Across the aisle, my mother dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief, a gesture more of performance than of genuine grief. Leo looked genuinely distraught. He had loved Grandpa Arthur in his own way, their bond forged over shared jokes and an appreciation for a good lobster roll. My father stood beside me, his hand a warm, solid presence on my arm. "He was so proud of you, Ellie," he whispered, a rare, direct expression of his own feelings. 3 days later, we gathered in the downtown Port Blossom office of Marcus Thorne, my grandfather's lawyer for over 40 years. The room was a study in quiet tradition, dark wood, leather chairs, and the faint, pleasant smell of old books. Marcus, a man whose calm demeanor had navigated countless family disputes, greeted us with somber professionalism. Arthur was very clear in his intentions, he began, opening a thick, cream-colored folder. He read the will in a steady, measured voice. There were bequests to the local maritime museum, to his long-serving housekeeper, and a generous, but not extravagant, trust fund for Leo. The remainder of the estate, the house on the cliff, the extensive investment portfolio, his scientific library, and all residual assets, valued at just over $4 million, he left to me. The only sound in the polished silence was my mother's breath, a sharp, tiny gasp, as if the air had been stolen from her lungs. Her manicured hand, which had been resting on the table, tightened into a white-knuckled fist. There must be a mistake," she said, her voice strained. "Arthur always said the family should be treated equally." Marcus shook his head slowly. "I'm afraid not, Eleanor." He was quite specific. He left a letter explaining his decision. He wanted the bulk of his estate to support Alara's research, to ensure his own scientific legacy would continue through her. "This is an insult." My mother's voice rose, losing its carefully modulated tone. "Leo is his grandson too. He has plans, business ventures that need capital." I was stunned into silence, overwhelmed by the magnitude of my grandfather's faith in me. The money was secondary. It was the trust, the belief, that left me breathless. It was also a burden. I would have traded every dollar to have him back, to ask him one more question, to walk with him on the beach one last time. "Mom, it's okay," I finally managed to say, my voice quiet. "We can work something out. Of course, I'll help Leo." Leo himself was silent, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. He looked less angry than lost. "We will discuss this as a family," my mother declared, her voice cold as the winter sea. She stood, grabbing her designer purse. "Marcus, consider this will contested. We will be fighting this." Marcus's expression didn't change, but a flicker of weariness crossed his eyes. "That is your right, of course. But you should know Arthur anticipated this. The will is exceptionally well fortified." The car ride back to my parents' house was a silent, suffocating ordeal. The moment we stepped inside, the storm broke. "Your grandfather was being manipulated," Eleanor began, pacing the Persian rug in their living room. "Or he was senile. There's no other explanation for cutting his own grandson out like that." "He didn't cut him out, Mom. He left him a trust fund," I countered, trying to keep my voice even. "And I'm more than willing to help him with his business. But Grandpa's house, his library, that's not just real estate. It's a legacy." "Your brother is in trouble, Alara," she said, ignoring my words. "Serious trouble. This isn't about some sentimental legacy. This is about family loyalty. It's about survival. It was then that Leo finally spoke, his voice heavy with shame. I owe people money, Ellie. A lot of money. Over the next hour, the full story came tumbling out. Leo's real estate venture had been a front for a spiraling gambling addiction. He had borrowed from loan sharks, men who didn't use contracts or lawyers, but threats and intimidation. He was in debt for over $500,000. I can help with that, I said immediately, my mind already calculating. We can liquidate some of the stocks from the estate. We can work out a payment plan. It's not enough, my mother insisted, her face flushed with a desperate, feverish energy I had never seen before. We need to sell everything. The house, the land, the books. Cash it all out. Give Leo a clean slate. But that's not what Grandpa wanted. I protested, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. His life's work is in that house. Your grandfather is gone, she snapped, her eyes hard and bright. The living are what matter now. That day, the unspoken tensions that had defined our family for years finally erupted into open warfare. My mother launched a campaign of emotional attrition, enlisting aunts, uncles, and cousins to call me, urging me to do the right thing for the family. A family dinner was convened, which was in reality an intervention aimed at me. He's your only brother, Alara, my Aunt Carol pleaded over a pot roast that tasted like ash in my mouth. Blood is thicker than water. Your research is a wonderful hobby, dear, my Uncle Frank added, patting my hand condescendingly, but this is real life. Your brother's life could be in danger. I left that dinner feeling profoundly alone, a stranger in my own family. My father had remained silent throughout the meal, his gaze fixed on his plate, a portrait of conflicted neutrality. I retreated to my lab, the one place where the world still made sense, where facts were verifiable and emotions didn't cloud the data. I had no idea then how far my mother would go to get what she wanted, or that the secrets she was protecting were far older and more devastating than my brother's gambling debts. The pressure campaign escalated in the weeks that followed. The phone calls from my mother became a daily ritual of psychological warfare, a blend of tearful pleading and icy recrimination. How can you be so selfish, Alara? She'd ask, her voice dripping with manufactured sorrow. I sacrificed so much for your education, for your ambitions. And for what? So you could hoard your grandfather's money while your brother faces ruin. Mom, I have offered to pay his debts, I would repeat, my patience fraying with each call. I've offered to set up a managed fund for him. I'm trying to help. But I will not sell Grandpa's house. I will not betray his last wishes. Wishes, she scoffed. You're talking about the wishes of a dead man. I'm talking about the safety of my living son. You're choosing a house over your brother. The calls were punctuated by texts from other family members, a Greek chorus of disapproval. Leo's approach was more direct. He would appear at my apartment, looking haunted and pale. They came to my apartment. Ellie, he confessed one evening, his hands trembling as he showed me a picture of his car's slashed tires. They said next time it would be my legs. This is real. My heart ached for him, for the fear in his eyes. We need to go to the police, Leo. He just shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. These guys aren't afraid of the police. The only thing they respect is cash. I scheduled another meeting with Marcus Thorne, hoping to find a legal path through the emotional minefield. We can create a structured settlement for Leo, Marcus proposed, his expression sympathetic. We can pay his creditors directly from the estate, on the condition that he enters a treatment program for his gambling addiction and agrees to financial counseling. It seemed like a perfect, rational solution. It balanced my duty to my grandfather's will with my desire to help my brother. When I presented the plan to my mother, she rejected it with breathtaking fury. A treatment program? Counseling? You want to humiliate him, she shrieked over the phone. He doesn't need to be treated like a charity case. He needs the capital to start over, to be his own man. The entire estate, Alara. That's the only answer. You need to sign it all over to him. The first truly terrifying incident occurred on a Tuesday night. I was working late, analyzing a new set of DNA sequences that seemed to show a promising pattern. At nearly 11 p.m., the security system for the genetics building pinged my phone. An access code had been used to enter the building after hours. My code? I quickly pulled up the live security feed on my laptop. The image showed my mother, her face a mask of grim determination, striding down the deserted hallway toward my lab. My blood ran cold. I met her at my lab door, my body instinctively blocking the entrance. Mom? What are you doing here? It's the middle of the night. She pushed past me, her eyes sweeping over the quiet, orderly space with raw contempt. So this is it, she said, her voice dripping with scorn. This is what you love more than your family. Your beakers and your charts. This is my work, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. I watched as she walked over to my main workbench and picked up a stack of printed sequencing gels, the raw data from months of work. Mom, please don't touch that. Important work? She let out a short, harsh laugh. I'll tell you what's important. 2 men visited your brother today. They didn't slash his tires this time. They sat with him for an hour and described, in detail, what they would do to him if he didn't have the full amount by the end of the month. A wave of nausea washed over me. I'm trying to help him. The plan I proposed. Your plan is an insult. She slammed the gels down on the counter, inches from a tray of sensitive reagents. Sign over the estate, Alara. Sign it all over. Or you can consider yourself no longer a part of this family. The ultimatum hung in the sterile, climate-controlled air. It was a line I never thought she would cross. You don't mean that, I whispered. Try me, she said, her eyes devoid of any warmth, any maternal affection I had ever known. You have always been your grandfather's girl. Cold, calculating, living in your own little world of science. It's time you learned what real loyalty means. After she swept out, leaving a wake of chilling silence, I leaned against the lab door, my legs trembling. The encounter had moved beyond family drama into something far more menacing. The next morning, I had all the locks and access codes to my lab changed. I also called Marcus again. His office, with its reassuring scent of leather and paper, felt like the only sane place left in the world. Your mother's behavior is escalating to a dangerous level, Alara, he said, his brow furrowed with concern. She officially filed the legal challenge to the will this morning, which means a certain provision Arthur included has now been triggered. What provision? Marcus paused, choosing his words with a lawyer's precision. About a year before he passed, Arthur came to see me. He was troubled. He spoke of inconsistencies, old family stories that didn't quite add up. He amended his will with a specific and rather unusual clause. My mind raced. What could he have meant? The clause states, Marcus continued, that if the will is contested by any family member, a full DNA verification of all primary beneficiaries will be required before any assets can be distributed, to confirm their genetic relationship to him. I stared at him, dumbfounded. A DNA test? Why? He never told me his specific suspicions, Marcus admitted. He simply insisted it was a necessary precaution to protect his legacy. A final experiment, you might say. Given his field, I suppose it makes a certain kind of sense. A scientist to the very end. But what could my grandfather have suspected so strongly that he would encode it into his final legal document? The scientist in me was fascinated by the puzzle. The granddaughter in me felt a deep, unsettling dread. When I informed my mother of the DNA requirement, her reaction was nothing short of volcanic. Absolutely not. That's a violation of my privacy. It's insane. Your grandfather was clearly losing his mind. It's a simple cheek swab, Mom, I said, her extreme response only deepening my suspicion. And according to Marcus, it's non-negotiable. If you want to continue the legal challenge, we all have to comply. After a day of furious arguments, she and Leo grudgingly agreed. My father, though not a beneficiary, offered to provide a sample as well. To clear the air, he said, his expression unreadable. We all submitted our samples to an independent lab. The results were due back in 2 weeks. None of us could possibly have imagined that those results contained a truth that would not just challenge the will, but detonate the entire foundation of our family. And my mother, cornered and desperate, would take one last, devastating step to try and stop that truth from ever coming to light. The day my world broke began with the quiet hum of possibility. I arrived at my lab just after dawn, a thermos of strong black coffee in my hand. The early morning light slanted through the large windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and casting long shadows from the rows of complex equipment. This space was more than a workplace. It was an extension of my own mind, ordered, meticulous, and dedicated to a singular purpose. On the wall opposite my desk hung a framed photo of my grandfather and me on the rocks of Sterling Cove, both of us grinning, a testament to the legacy I was striving to honor. That morning, I was on the cusp of a significant breakthrough. For weeks, I had been painstakingly cross-referencing genetic markers from 3 families afflicted with Sterling-Vance neuropathy. I had isolated a unique protein folding error that seemed to be the key, the specific malfunction that set the disease in motion. My notebooks, filled with 10 years of handwritten observations, hypotheses, and meticulously recorded data, were stacked on my desk, a testament to a decade of dedication. Morning, Dr. Vance, my graduate assistant, a bright young woman named Chloe, called as she came in around 8. The cell cultures from the incubator are ready for analysis. Excellent, I replied, a surge of excitement cutting through my focus. Let's run the new sequencing protocol today. I have a good feeling about this one. The morning passed in a blur of focused, productive work. Around noon, Chloe left for a seminar, and I decided to step out for a quick lunch at the small cafe across the campus green. I followed my usual lockdown procedure. Sensitive samples were returned to the sub-zero freezer, computer locked, lab door secured behind me. As I stood in line for a sandwich, my phone buzzed with an urgent notification from my lab's new high-level security system. Alert: unauthorized entry attempt, code invalid. Alert: forcible entry detected. A grainy image from the camera I'd had installed outside my door showed a familiar figure, my mother, her face contorted in a mask of fury, shoving against the door. I dropped my wallet and ran. I didn't wait for the campus shuttle. I sprinted across the green, my heart hammering against my ribs, a cold, sickening dread coiling in my gut. As I neared the genetics building, I could hear it, a rhythmic, splintering crash, followed by the shattering of glass. I burst through the door of my lab and stopped dead. The scene before me was one of methodical, violent chaos. My mother stood in the center of the room, her designer coat thrown over a chair, wielding a heavy steel stool like a weapon. She was bringing it down again and again on the delicate instruments of my main workbench. The screen of my electron microscope was shattered. A centrifuge lay on its side, its door hanging from a single hinge. Broken glass from beakers, petri dishes, and sample slides crunched under her feet. "Mom." The word was a strangled cry. "What are you doing?" She turned to face me, breathing heavily, her eyes wild with a terrifying, unhinged light. "Your precious work," she screamed, her voice hoarse. "This is what you care about. Not your family. Not your brother. Just this cold, sterile obsession. Stop it. Please." I lunged forward, but she was already moving toward the tall, sub-zero freezer that held my most valuable assets, 10 years of tissue and blood samples from patients and their families, the biological library from which all my research was drawn. With a grunt of effort, she wrenched the heavy door open, exposing the carefully labeled racks of vials to the warm room air. She began pulling them out, tray by tray, and throwing them to the floor, where they shattered, their precious contents spilling across the linoleum. "No!" The sound was torn from my throat. I saw the labels as they fell. SVN 001, Family A. SVN 002, Family B. These weren't just samples. They were the hopes of families who had trusted me, some of whom had children who had already been lost to the disease. "Your brother's life is being destroyed because of your selfishness," she shrieked, her rage unabated. "You and your grandfather, always thinking you were better than the rest of us. Hiding in your labs with your books and your secrets." I watched in horror as she moved to my desk. She grabbed my notebooks, the physical record of my entire career, and began ripping out the pages, shredding them with her bare hands. The breakthroughs, the dead ends, the late-night epiphanies all reduced to confetti. And then, something inside me shifted. The initial wave of panic and horror receded, replaced by a strange, preternatural calm. It was the detached focus of a scientist observing an uncontrollable reaction. The damage was already done. The samples were contaminated. The data was destroyed. My emotional response was now irrelevant to the outcome. I stopped trying to reason with her, stopped pleading. I just stood and watched as she completed her rampage. My stillness seemed to infuriate her more than my protests had. "Say something," she finally panted, dropping a ruined notebook to the floor. "Don't you dare stand there looking at me with that calm, superior expression. What is there to say, Mom? I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. You've destroyed my lab. You've ruined a decade of work. What do you want me to do now? Sign a confession. I want you to save your brother, she yelled. I want you to give him the money. Most of my critical data is backed up to a secure university server, I said, the words falling like ice chips into the ruined space. The physical samples are a devastating loss, and the notebooks are irreplaceable. But my work is not entirely gone. What you've destroyed today, completely and irrevocably, is our relationship. The quiet certainty in my voice seemed to finally penetrate her rage. She looked around the room as if seeing the scale of the destruction for the first time. The wildness in her eyes flickered, replaced by a dawning horror. I've already called campus security, I continued in that same, flat tone. They should be here any moment. I will be pressing charges. Catherine. Her face went pale, the anger draining away to reveal a raw, desperate fear. You wouldn't. I'm your mother. You are a person who just committed a felony, I replied, and only then did I feel the first tremor in my hands, the first crack in my armor of calm. Please leave. 2 campus security officers appeared in the doorway, their expressions shifting from routine concern to outright shock as they took in the scene. Dr. Vance? Is everything all right? One of them asked, his hand instinctively going to his radio. No, I said, my voice finally breaking. Nothing is all right. After they had escorted my weeping, protesting mother from the building, I was left alone in the wreckage. I walked through the debris, my shoes crunching on the glass that represented so many years of my life. I knelt and picked up a single, shattered vial, its label miraculously intact. It was from a little boy who had died 2 years prior, whose parents had given me a sample in the hope that it might prevent another family from suffering the same loss. Only then did the dam of my composure break. I sank to the floor amidst the ruin and chaos, and I wept. I wept for the lost work, for the betrayed trust of my patients, for the grandfather whose legacy I had failed to protect. But most of all, I wept for the final, violent death of the illusion that I had a mother who loved me. That is how Chloe found me half an hour later. She navigated the debris field with care and knelt beside me, placing a hand on my trembling shoulder. Oh my God, Ilara, she whispered, using my first name for the first time. What happened? I looked up at her through my tears, the answer raw and simple. Family happened. That evening, after hours of statements to the university police and then the city police, after my department head had surveyed the catastrophic damage with a grim face, and after I had politely declined dozens of offers of help from shocked colleagues, I went home to my quiet apartment and did 2 things. First, I filed for an immediate restraining order against my own mother. Second, I sent a single text message to Marcus Thorne. The DNA results are no longer just a legal formality. They are everything. I didn't yet know the full truth those results held, but I knew with a chilling certainty that my mother's rampage was not just about money. It was the desperate, destructive act of a woman trying to bury a secret so deep she was willing to destroy her own daughter's life to keep it hidden. The meeting at Marcus Thorne's office 2 weeks later felt less like a legal proceeding and more like the final act of a Greek tragedy. The conference room, with its panoramic view of the sparkling bay, felt like a stage set for a drama of profound and painful revelation. The university had been incredibly supportive, providing me with temporary lab space and a grant to begin the painstaking process of rebuilding. My mother had been charged with felony destruction of property and was out on bail, her presence in this room a condition of her ongoing legal battle. I arrived first, needing a few moments of quiet to steel myself. Marcus greeted me with a solemn nod. The lab results came in this morning, he said, placing a thick, sealed envelope on the polished table between us. I haven't opened them. I felt it was important we all heard them for the first time together. My father arrived next. He looked tired, the usual academic twinkle in his eyes replaced by a deep, weary sadness. He walked over to me and, for the first time in years, pulled me into a fierce, protective hug. Ellie, I am so sorry, he whispered. There is no excuse for what your mother did. None. Have you spoken to her? I asked. Only through lawyers, he said, stepping back. I'm staying at the faculty guest house. I needed some space to think. Leo came next, looking gaunt and anxious. He wouldn't meet my eyes, instead taking a seat on the far side of the table, as if putting a physical distance between himself and the impending judgment. Finally, my mother entered, flanked by her high-priced lawyer. She was impeccably dressed, her face a carefully composed mask of wrong dignity, but the strain around her eyes was undeniable. She took her seat and stared straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge me or my father. "Let's begin," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the thick tension. "Mrs. Matthews, your legal challenge to the will of Arthur Sterling is the reason we are here. However, as you know, that challenge triggered a mandatory provision within the will." He picked up the sealed envelope. "This provision requires DNA verification of the primary beneficiaries. These are the results from the accredited genetics lab." The room was utterly silent as he slid a letter opener under the flap and pulled out a multi-page report. He scanned the first page, and I saw his professional composure slip for just a fraction of a second. His eyebrows shot up, and he looked from the paper to my mother, then to my father, a look of profound astonishment on his face. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "this is unexpected." "What is it?" my father asked, leaning forward, his voice tight with apprehension. Marcus took a deep breath. "According to this certified analysis," he said, his eyes fixed on the report, "the DNA sample provided by Leo Vance shows no genetic markers consistent with him being the biological grandson of Arthur Sterling." A collective gasp went through the room. "That's a lie," my mother cried out, her composure shattering. "The lab made a mistake. The samples were contaminated." Leo looked as though he'd been struck. "What? That's not possible. Grandpa Arthur." "There's more," Marcus said, holding up a hand to silence the rising clamor. He looked directly at my father. "Richard, I'm sorry. The report also concludes, with a 99.99% probability, that Leo is not your biological son." The world seemed to stop. The air was sucked out of the room. My father's face went slack, all color draining from it as the words sank in. He slowly turned his head to look at my mother, his expression one of dawning, catastrophic comprehension. "Eleanor," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "What is he talking about?" My mother burst into tears, her lawyer's frantic whispers in her ear going unheard. "It was a mistake," she sobbed, her carefully constructed facade crumbling into ruin. "One time, you were at that conference in Chicago, Richard. I was lonely. He was kind to me." "He," my father repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "Who, Eleanor?" The name she whispered was that of a family friend, a man who had moved away decades ago, a man who had been my father's colleague in the English department. The betrayal was absolute, a lie woven into the very fabric of our family for over 30 years. All the pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The desperation, the irrational fury, the willingness to destroy my life's work. It was never just about Leo's gambling debts. It was about this. This was the secret she was protecting. The DNA test wasn't just a threat to the inheritance. It was a threat to her entire life, to the carefully constructed reality she had sold to all of us. "You knew," I said, the words coming out in a whisper. "This is why. You destroyed my lab to stop this from coming out." "Your grandfather suspected," Marcus added gently. "He told me he never had proof, just a lingering doubt. That's why he put the clause in the will. It was his final search for the truth." Leo finally found his voice, a raw cry of anguish. "So my whole life has been a lie? I'm not even a Vance? Who the hell am I?" "You are my son." Eleanor wept, reaching for him. He flinched away from her touch as if from a hot flame. "Are you? Or are you just the woman who lied to me every single day of my life?" My father stood up, his movements slow and deliberate like an old man. He looked at my mother, and in his eyes, I saw 38 years of marriage dissolve into dust. "I'll have my lawyer contact your lawyer," he said, his voice hollow. He then turned to Leo, and a flicker of the father he had always been returned. "I raised you. I love you. That part is not a lie. But I need time." He walked out of the room without a backward glance. Leo followed a moment later, pushing past his sobbing mother as if she were a stranger. The great family matriarch, the woman whose will had bent us all to her shape, was left alone in her chair, a crumpled, pathetic figure. The legal contest was over. The inheritance was mine. But it was a victory that tasted of ashes. I walked out of that office and into the bright, indifferent sunlight. My family, as I had known it, was gone. It had been an illusion, a story built on a foundation of secrets. And I, the geneticist, the seeker of empirical truth, was left to figure out what, if anything, could be salvaged from the wreckage. I had my grandfather's house, his legacy, his belief in me. But I was also left with a brother who was not my brother, a father betrayed, a mother who was a stranger, and the profound, aching question of what it truly means to be a family. In the aftermath of the revelation, our family didn't just fracture, it atomized. The quiet, predictable universe I had known ceased to exist, replaced by a strange new cosmos of floating, disconnected bodies. My father filed for divorce the following week. In our phone calls, he sounded like a man emerging from a long, deep sleep, blinking in a light he hadn't realized was missing. He spoke of taking a sabbatical, of traveling, of finally writing the book on Melville he'd been planning for 20 years. He was not angry, but liberated, as if a weight he never knew he was carrying had been lifted. Leo disappeared for a week. His phone went straight to voicemail. I left messages, telling him I was there, that whatever the DNA said, he was still my brother. Finally, he called me from a motel in Vermont. His voice was rough, but for the first time, it was stripped of all its usual bravado. "Can we talk, Ellie?" he asked. "Without Mom or Dad. Just us." We met halfway, at a diner off a New Hampshire highway. He looked thinner, but his eyes were clear. He told me he'd spent the week driving, thinking, and for the first time in his adult life, being completely honest with himself. "The weirdest thing," he said, stirring his coffee, "is that a part of me is relieved. I spent my whole life feeling like I didn't quite fit, like I was always trying to live up to the Sterling Vance legacy. Grandpa Arthur, Dad, you, all so brilliant. I always felt like the family screw up." He looked at me, a wry, sad smile on his face. "Turns out I wasn't a Vance at all. Maybe that's why." We talked for hours. I told him about the structured settlement I'd arranged with Marcus, using a portion of the inheritance to pay off his debts and fund a rehab program. For the first time, he didn't argue. He accepted the help, not as an entitlement, but as a lifeline. "I need to figure out who Leo is," he said. "Not Leo Vance. Just Leo." My relationship with my mother was the most complex to navigate. She sent long, rambling emails, a mix of self-pity, blame, and desperate pleas for forgiveness. I didn't respond for a month. When I finally did, it was to set a boundary. I would not discuss the past with her until she had taken full responsibility for her actions, not just the lie, but the destruction of my lab. Her actions had consequences, not just for our family, but for the patient families who had placed their trust in me. In the end, she accepted a plea bargain that involved a hefty restitution paid to the university, mandatory therapy, and a permanent restraining order keeping her away from my work and home. She moved to Florida, a geographical and emotional exile of her own making. With the legal and emotional debris field slowly clearing, I turned my focus to the future. I moved into my grandfather's house on the cliff. The first few weeks were lonely. The house echoed with his absence. But slowly, I began to make it my own. I converted the large, sun-filled ground floor into a new, state-of-the-art laboratory, the Sterling Institute. The inheritance, which had been a catalyst for so much pain, became a tool for creation. I hired a small team, including my loyal assistant Chloe, and we began the monumental task of rebuilding my research from the ground up. The destruction had been a trauma, but it was also, in a strange way, a gift. Stripped of my old data and familiar methods, I was forced to look at the problem of Sterling Vance neuropathy from entirely new angles. I reread my grandfather's original papers and found a notation I had previously overlooked, a detail about the disease's prevalence in different tidal zones. It was a clue, a breadcrumb he had left for me. Following it led to a breakthrough. We discovered that the genetic error was triggered by an environmental factor, a specific marine microorganism found in the local waters. It was a discovery that shifted the paradigm from merely managing the disease to potentially preventing it. A year after the day my lab was destroyed, I stood on the deck of my grandfather's house, looking out at the endless expanse of the Atlantic. The house was no longer just his legacy, it was mine. The institute that bore his name was funding promising young scientists, and our own research was on the verge of clinical trials. Leo called me that evening. He had completed his rehab program and was working as a financial counselor, helping others avoid the mistakes he had made. His voice was calm, centered. He had recently reached out to his biological father, and they were beginning to build a tentative, curious relationship. He and I spoke every week, our bond stronger and more honest than it had ever been when we believed we were full siblings. My father sent me a postcard from the Galapagos Islands, a picture of a giant tortoise on the front. On the back, he wrote, "Evolution is a slow, strange process. So is healing. Love, Dad." I thought of my mother in Florida, a woman I might never have a close relationship with again, and I felt not anger, but a kind of sad peace. I had learned that forgiveness isn't always about reconciliation. Sometimes, it's about accepting what is and letting go of what you wish had been. My grandfather believed that the secrets of life were written in our DNA. But I have learned that the story of a family is written in something more complex. It's written in choices, in acts of loyalty and betrayal, in the painful, necessary truths we tell, and in the quiet, resilient love that can sometimes grow in the ruins. Resilience, I've discovered, is not about being unbreakable. It's about the grace with which you pick up the pieces and the courage to build something new. I often wonder how many of us have had to redefine our understanding of family after a painful truth has come to light. How many have found that the loss of something precious was the catalyst for unexpected, vital growth? The path forward is rarely easy, but in the end, the most important legacy we can build is a life of our own making, founded on the bedrock of our own hard-won truth.